Yesterday, someone told me, it feels like everything in my life happens the same way. Only the characters change. She didn't realize she was describing a silent algorithm, a pattern repeating itself beneath her awareness. You know that strange déjà vu when life seems to copy and paste the same scenes, just dressed differently? That's not coincidence. It's code. Invisible, responsive, precise. What if reality isn't random at all? What if every reaction, every person, every coincidence is a reflection of the frequency you keep feeding? Because the truth is unsettling and liberating at once. Reality doesn't speak in words. It mirrors what you continuously observe. There's a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when life loops. You think you've moved on, learned the lesson, closed the chapter. Yet months or years later, the same emotional landscape reappears. Different people, different settings, but the same undertone. Disappointment that tastes familiar. Tension that arrives with perfect timing. Silence that feels rehearsed. It's like walking into a new room, only to realize it's painted with the same color you tried to leave behind. This is how the quiet algorithm works. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind new names, new addresses, new goals. It waits until your awareness lowers. Then it repeats the sequence it knows you'll respond to. You call it coincidence, but coincidence doesn't have a memory. This does. Think of how often you found yourself in the same type of argument, maybe with a partner, a co-worker, a parent. The words change, but the energy doesn't. Or perhaps it's financial. The sudden rise, the short-lived success, the familiar collapse. Maybe it's internal, the burst of motivation followed by the same quiet retreat. The rhythm is recognizable, almost scripted. That's not failure, that's feedback. Patterns persist because they are sustained by observation, by the energy of attention. Every time you revisit the feeling, even through frustration or regret, you're giving the code what it needs to continue running. You think you're analyzing the problem, but you're actually refreshing the page. Most people only notice the visible loop, the breakup, the lost opportunity, the burnout. But the real repetition happens in microseconds, in the emotional signatures that precede the event. The small tightening in your chest when someone challenges you. The quick surge of defensiveness before you even process the words. The inner flinch that predicts rejection before anyone says no. These micro-responses are the algorithm's language. If you pay attention closely, you'll sense the moment the loop starts loading. The body knows before the mind does. A certain heaviness, a subtle déjà vu. The same way your phone autofills a password, your nervous system autofills a reality. But here's the strange part. The algorithm doesn't have malice. It's not punishment, it's persistence. It keeps presenting the same pattern because, from its perspective, that's what you keep confirming as real. It's your signal of coherence. Whatever emotion you've repeated enough times becomes the reference point for truth. So the system, your mind-body interface with reality, keeps mirroring it to maintain stability. Imagine an echo chamber built not from sound, but from attention. You speak into it through your focus, and it answers by amplifying what you emphasize most. The more emotional charge something carries, the louder it echoes. You can't silence it by force. You can only change the tone of what you send out. Try this now, quietly. Recall the last situation that felt like an unwanted repeat. Don't analyze it. Just observe what happens in your body as you remember. Where does it tighten? Where does it rush? That physical cue is not random. It's the activation point, the line of code reloading itself. If you stay with the sensation without judging it, something small begins to shift. The code hesitates. It's as if the program needs your emotional engagement to continue. And without it, it loses access to your energy. The loop weakens not because you fight it, but because you stop feeding it with identical attention. You may notice that once you stop reacting, reality doesn't rush to fill the silence. It pauses. That pause can feel like emptiness at first, but it's actually recalibration. The system is checking for your new input. Most people mistake that stillness for stagnation and rush to recreate movement, unknowingly restarting the old cycle. But if you can endure the quiet, you'll feel something different emerging underneath. Not control, but clarity. It's in that clarity that the hidden origin of your patterns begins to show itself. The moment where observation turns into creation, where focus becomes code. Because what you call life happening again might, in truth, be your own attention playing the same song on repeat. And once you hear the melody clearly, you can decide whether to let it play or rewrite the tune. Every pattern has a birthplace, a quiet moment where something inside you decides what reality means. It's rarely dramatic. It happens in the small, unnoticed seconds when emotion fuses with observation. A tone of voice, a gesture, a silence that your nervous system reads as danger or disapproval. From that moment on, a fragment of you starts scanning the world for proof that it understood correctly. That scanning becomes a loop. You can trace almost any repeating life situation back to an early observation that went unexamined. A child who felt unseen learns that attention must be earned through performance, and years later, every relationship becomes an unconscious audition. Someone who grew up around volatility may equate tension with connection. Calm feels foreign, even suspicious. So when peace arrives, they find a way to disturb it, not because they enjoy chaos, but because chaos feels like home. The mind doesn't cling to pain out of self-destruction. It clings to familiarity. Familiarity equals safety, even if it hurts. That's how the hidden origin of your patterns hides in plain sight. It wears the disguise of normal. The strange part is how mechanical this process is. Each time you observe reality through an emotion, you're updating your internal model of how things work. That model then instructs your perception on what to notice next. It's a feedback loop between attention and experience. You think you're seeing the world objectively, but what you're really seeing is your most repeated observation reflected back. Science has a quiet way of confirming this. Cognitive neuroscience calls it predictive processing. The brain doesn't simply record reality. It predicts it moment by moment, filling in gaps with familiar expectations. Your nervous system is a forecasting engine, constantly comparing incoming data with stored templates of what it believes will happen. That's why you can hear what wasn't said, or feel rejected before anyone rejects you. You're not reacting to life, you're reacting to your forecast of life. That forecast becomes the skeleton of the pattern. The more emotionally charged the original observation was, the stronger the forecast becomes. The brain, trying to protect you, keeps prioritizing anything that matches that emotional signature. It's a survival mechanism that accidentally turns into a self-fulfilling algorithm. You can feel it in real time if you slow down enough. When someone criticizes you, and you feel that instant flush of shame or defensiveness, that's your early code being triggered. You're not reacting to the person. You're reacting to a stored instruction that says, when this signal appears, this is who you are. The pattern doesn't originate in the event, it originates in the meaning your system attached to the event long ago. And meaning, once reinforced, becomes architecture. It builds invisible walls around what you consider possible. You might tell yourself you're open to abundance, love, or peace, but if your internal model doesn't recognize those states as safe, your perception will keep editing them out. The result? You meet the same people, make the same choices, and call it coincidence. Try a quiet test. Recall something in your life that keeps circling back, a repeated disappointment, or a habit you can't dissolve. Then ask, what feeling always appears first when this happens? Not the story, not the words, the feeling. That emotion is the key signature of the original program. If you sit with it, instead of trying to fix it, you may notice an image, a memory, or a sentence surfacing from long ago. That's the moment the code was written. It doesn't matter whether you remember the exact origin or not. What matters is that you start noticing the connection between your observation and your experience. Because every time you label something as the way it is, you're adding one more line of code to the algorithm. The world doesn't keep proving you right. It keeps reflecting what your attention declares as true. And when that truth carries unresolved emotion, it becomes magnetic. It pulls similar events to reinforce itself. The hidden origin of your pattern is not in fate or external circumstance. It's in the point where perception and emotion shake hands and decide to call it reality. Once you see that, the next question naturally arises. If observation is the source, what keeps feeding it? What is the invisible command that tells the algorithm to keep running the same line of code, even when you consciously want to change it? The answer lies in something almost everyone does without noticing: the silent mistake that keeps the code alive. The most persistent illusion in human behavior is thinking that awareness alone breaks a pattern. You notice what keeps repeating. You name it, maybe even analyze it, and yet it stays. The same situations find you again, slightly disguised, perfectly timed. The reason is simple, but rarely seen. You keep observing the problem through the same emotion that created it. That emotion is the language your reality listens to. Imagine trying to rewrite a program, but every time you type a new line of code, you do it with the same syntax error. The system doesn't care about your new words. It reads the energy behind them, the emotional frequency that tells it, repeat this. You can change jobs, partners, or locations, but if the emotional template stays intact, the algorithm reads no difference. It just reconfigures the scenery and restarts the loop. You've probably felt this before, after deciding to move on from something. You feel clear, even empowered. Then one small trigger reactivates the exact same emotional charge you thought you'd outgrown. It's not weakness, it's physics. Observation plus emotion equals activation. As long as the same emotion accompanies your focus, you're feeding the same command. That's the silent mistake, confusing intellectual recognition with energetic change. You tell yourself, I know why this happens. But knowledge without a shift in emotional tone is like understanding the recipe while using the same ingredients. The result can only taste the same. The mind loves control through explanation. It feels safe when it can label the problem. But the algorithm doesn't read labels, it reads coherence. If your thoughts say, I'm free from this, but your body still feels the contraction of fear, guilt, or resentment, your system receives a split signal. And when faced with mixed input, reality defaults to the most familiar frequency, the one it knows how to sustain. The key lies not in suppressing emotion, but in observing it without fueling it. That small distinction sounds subtle, but it changes everything. When you watch anger, sadness, or fear arise without immediately judging or justifying it, you break the feedback loop. Emotion only becomes code when it fuses with identification, when you say, this is me. Without that identification, the energy has nowhere to attach. It moves through instead of looping back. Try to notice this next time you're triggered. There's a moment, usually less than a second long, where the emotion is pure sensation before it becomes story. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your thoughts prepare the script, but in that microsecond, you still have access to awareness. If you can stay there, the program hesitates. You're present at the line where old code meets new observation. That hesitation is not weakness, it's freedom in disguise, because it's in that pause that you stop transmitting the same emotional signal to your environment. The algorithm doesn't know what to do with neutrality, it can only replicate intensity. When you stop reacting, reality pauses with you, waiting for a new command. Many people, though, don't recognize this pause for what it is. They interpret it as emptiness, loss of motivation, or confusion. They rush to fill it with analysis or distraction, unaware that they're reinstalling the same loop just to escape the silence. But silence is the reset point, the moment the system awaits an updated instruction. If you want to sense this mistake in yourself, watch what happens when something uncomfortable appears. Do you immediately try to fix it, reason with it, or escape it? Each of those reactions is a way of feeding attention back into the old code. The pattern doesn't survive because it's powerful. It survives because it keeps being observed with the same emotional charge. There's a quiet discipline in letting an emotion complete its natural arc without narrative. The nervous system processes it, the mind resists labeling it, and the body releases it. What remains after that wave is clarity, not because you controlled the experience, but because you didn't recycle it. Over time, this practice reveals a strange paradox. Your effort to control reality often keeps you trapped in it. The very drive to fix, improve, or heal from the pattern still carries the vibration of the pattern itself. You're speaking to the algorithm in its native tongue, asking it to change while confirming it still exists. So the transformation doesn't begin with stronger control or deeper understanding. It begins with a lighter touch. Observation without emotional repetition. That's when the signal starts to fade. And yet, even as this truth begins to surface, another layer hides underneath. The illusion that you're consciously steering your life when in fact, the deeper programming happens far below deliberate thought. To understand why the same loops keep replaying even after conscious effort, you have to look into the quiet machinery of control itself, the false sense of mastery that convinces you you're the one making every choice. There's a quiet confidence in believing you're in charge of your life, that your choices, plans, and reasoning are the steering wheel of your reality. You make decisions, set intentions, define goals. You tell yourself, I know what I'm doing. But beneath that certainty, another layer is operating, a deeper intelligence that runs most of your responses long before you consciously decide anything. And this is where the illusion begins, the belief that control equals awareness, when in truth, most control is just pre-programmed reaction dressed up as logic. Neuroscience has a way of humbling us here. Experiments show that your brain initiates actions fractions of a second before you're aware of deciding them. What you call choice is often the conscious mind catching up with the subconscious one, writing a story after the action is already in motion. You're the narrator of your actions, not always their originator. And yet, the mind loves to take ownership. It feels safe believing it commands the sequence. That belief is comforting, but it also blinds you to how patterns keep self-reinforcing behind that sense of control. Consider the last time you found yourself in a familiar conflict. Maybe a disagreement that unfolded almost word for word, like one you've had before. You may have told yourself you were being clear or assertive, but the tone, timing, and emotional frequency were identical to the old pattern. The conscious reasoning was new, but the energetic script was ancient. You were steering, yes, but on autopilot. This is how the false sense of control deceives the mind. It lets you believe that because you're thinking differently, you're acting differently. But thinking and observing are not the same thing. You can repeat the same emotional observation through brand new thoughts, and the algorithm still reads it as the same input. Reality doesn't respond to what you say you want. It responds to what your nervous system actually believes is true. That's why affirmations and intentions sometimes backfire. When you declare something consciously, but feel the opposite unconsciously, the system receives a mixed signal. You're asking for expansion with the energy of contraction. The outer results follow coherence, not wishful thinking. The mind, in its effort to maintain the illusion of control, constantly edits experience to fit its narrative. It filters out sensations, emotions, or facts that don't align with the identity it's protecting. This creates what psychologists call confirmation bias, a built-in algorithm that seeks evidence of what it already assumes is real. You think you're analyzing the world. The truth is, you're mostly defending your own version of it. If you slow down enough, you can sense when this inner editor takes over. You'll notice the micro-justifications, the small inner voice saying, I already know this, or that doesn't apply to me. Each of those thoughts is the program shielding itself from an update. Awareness that feels like mastery can quietly become resistance in disguise. Try to picture your mind not as a commander, but as a translator. It doesn't create reality. It interprets signals, emotional, sensory, energetic, and organizes them into a story that makes sense. When the story feels consistent, you feel in control. When it doesn't, you experience anxiety, because the translator has lost coherence with the deeper field. Control, then, is not power. It's an attempt to keep coherence without surrendering to actual perception. Here's the paradox. The more you try to control reality from the surface, the more rigid your system becomes. Rigid systems are predictable, and predictable systems attract repetition. You become easier to read by your own algorithm, which means the same scenarios can find you again with mathematical precision. Control is not how you escape the code, it's how you sustain it. But there's a different quality of presence that operates beyond control. Not passive, not detached, but deeply receptive. It's what happens when you allow perception to expand without rushing to manage it. You start to sense the tiny gap between stimulus and response, the invisible corridor where true freedom hides. Most people never stay there long enough to recognize it, because surrender feels like losing control. But in that surrender, something else begins to emerge: coherence. And coherence is what the system understands as truth. It doesn't need explanation, only alignment. When your inner state stops contradicting itself, reality no longer needs to mirror confusion back to you. The observer and the observed begin to resonate. Yet this insight leads to another trap, one that modern spirituality often falls into, mistaking language about energy, manifestation, and vibration for genuine observation. The algorithm adapts even there, hiding behind noble words and good intentions. To see through that next veil, you have to question not just your control, but your entire interpretation of spirituality itself, the blind spot that keeps even conscious seekers repeating unconscious patterns. Modern spirituality loves light. It speaks in bright tones: manifestation, vibration, attraction, abundance. It promises that if you think positively enough, the universe will rearrange itself to match your desire. But beneath this optimism lies a quiet contradiction. You can't align with truth by bypassing what you don't want to feel. Most people don't realize that the energy shaping their reality isn't the one they speak about. It's the one they silently believe. The blind spot begins here. You can chant affirmations, visualize outcomes, and repeat intentions, yet if your nervous system is still wired for fear or unworthiness, the algorithm listens to that frequency, not your words. The universe doesn't respond to language. It responds to coherence. Coherence means that what you say, what you feel, and what you believe are in resonance. And for most of us, that alignment is fractured. We use spiritual vocabulary to polish the surface while the inner code remains unchanged. It's easy to see why this happens. Spiritual teachings often focus on changing thought, but thought alone is only a small part of observation. Beneath every thought is a physiological echo: the tightening of the gut, the micro-tension in the jaw, the subtle contraction that signals what you truly expect from life. Those signals transmit louder than any mantra. Your cells broadcast what your mind denies. This creates a kind of spiritual double exposure, one image on top of another. The upper layer says, "I'm evolving, I'm manifesting abundance," while the lower one still whispers, "I'm not safe unless I control everything." The two layers cancel each other out, producing static in your reality. That static is what people call mixed results. The algorithm isn't confused, it's simply reflecting the inconsistency of the signal it receives. If you pay close attention, you can feel this split in the body. When you try to visualize a future version of yourself and an almost imperceptible discomfort appears, that's the dissonance. You're not failing, you're meeting the boundary of your actual belief system. The part of you that doesn't yet agree with your intention is the one creating your reality. Until you bring that part into awareness, the old code keeps running, no matter how inspired your words sound. This is where modern spirituality often turns into subtle self-deception. The mind learns the vocabulary of light and uses it to avoid darkness. Phrases like, "everything happens for a reason," or "I'm attracting this for my growth," can become defense mechanisms to avoid feeling pain directly. You can explain suffering without ever experiencing it, but unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It becomes data in the algorithm. It programs new repetitions under the mask of spiritual progress. The blind spot isn't about false teachings, it's about false coherence, the appearance of alignment without the actual integration of emotion and perception. True alignment isn't peaceful in the beginning, it's disruptive. When your inner system starts to synchronize with truth, it often feels like losing control. The old emotional signatures protest. The nervous system resists stillness because stillness exposes what was running the show. Try a small experiment. The next time you affirm something you want, love, clarity, abundance, pause and listen closely to your body's first response. Does it relax or tense? Does it open or subtly withdraw? That response is your true prayer. It's the one the algorithm understands. Words are secondary. Physiology is primary. You can't affirm your way past your own vibration. The irony is that what most people call manifestation is really observation training. It's the art of aligning perception with emotion so precisely that reality no longer contradicts your signal. You stop asking for things and start noticing that what you observe with genuine coherence already begins to form. Creation becomes recognition. But getting there requires a humility that many spiritual seekers avoid. The willingness to see where your practice is performative, to notice how often you reach for comfort instead of presence, to realize that raising your vibration is not about escaping the lower ones, but integrating them into wholeness. Coherence is not the absence of darkness, it's the inclusion of it in balance. When you stop performing spirituality and start observing yourself honestly, something subtle but profound happens. The system no longer needs to test you with mirrored lessons. The loops slow down because you've stopped pretending. You're no longer broadcasting two frequencies at once. And yet this clarity leads to an even deeper revelation. When the spiritual mask dissolves, the algorithm begins to shift its focus. It no longer just repeats situations. It starts to repeat you. The identity that once played the role of seeker becomes the very program the system is now copying. There's a moment, often invisible, always quiet, when repetition stops feeling like a pattern and starts feeling like you. It's the point where the algorithm no longer just shapes your circumstances. It starts shaping your sense of self. The loop migrates from the outer world into your very definition of who you are. You stop saying, "This keeps happening to me," and begin saying, "This is just the way I am." That shift seems innocent. It even feels like self-awareness. But it's actually the algorithm's most elegant disguise. Once a pattern fuses with identity, it no longer needs to create external events to stay alive. You maintain it internally. The repetition becomes self-sustaining. The moment you identify with the emotion that once accompanied the loop, you feed the code without realizing it. It happens gradually. A person who was once reacting to rejection begins to expect it. Then, subtly, they start acting in ways that confirm it. The anticipation of the wound becomes the personality. The mind, ever loyal to coherence, adjusts the entire self-concept around that familiar emotional tone. You're not merely experiencing the pattern anymore, you're living inside its architecture. What we call personality is often just the stabilized residue of our most persistent reactions. The confident one who always takes control may actually be protecting an old fear of invisibility. The peacemaker might be a child who learned that safety comes from never creating conflict. These are not random traits. They're refined defense codes, shaped over years, optimized to maintain internal predictability. And predictability is what the algorithm values most. It doesn't need you to be happy or fulfilled. It only needs you to be consistent. The more consistent the signal, the easier it is to replicate. That's why even self-destructive behaviors can feel oddly comfortable. They maintain internal coherence. Pain can be predictable. Unhappiness can feel safe. If you want to sense this in real time, pay attention to how you describe yourself. The small automatic phrases, "I've always been like this. That's just how I react. I can't help it." Each one is an access point into the code. Behind those sentences lives a silent contract, a decision your system once made to interpret survival as identity. That's the moment the pattern stopped being external and started wearing your face. Neuroscience describes something similar through neuroplasticity. Every repeated emotion strengthens a neural pathway. The more often you feel it, the faster your brain travels that route. Eventually, it becomes the default, not because it's true, but because it's efficient. The brain loves efficiency. So emotional repetition hardens into identity not through logic, but through habit. You become what your neurons find easiest to recreate. The most deceptive part of this transformation is how rational it can sound. Once a pattern solidifies into identity, the mind builds sophisticated narratives to defend it. It says, I'm just being realistic, or I'm protecting my energy, or I know my limits. Those statements feel wise, even grounded. But often they're camouflage, protective stories shielding the code from being rewritten. The ego's job is not to evolve, it's to preserve continuity. There's nothing wrong with identity. It's the structure that allows you to interact with the world. The problem begins when identity stops being flexible, when you no longer have a story, but start serving it. The algorithm doesn't imprison you with external conditions. It keeps you loyal to your own self-image. You start policing your own transformation, ensuring that nothing too unfamiliar threatens the you you've learned to recognize. You can feel this loyalty physically. When someone challenges your self-concept, when they suggest you're capable of more than you believe, notice the internal tightening, the reflex to defend the old image. That resistance is the algorithm guarding its favorite program, continuity through emotion. The moment you begin to question who you are without your familiar reactions, a strange emptiness appears. It can feel like losing your coordinates, but that emptiness isn't the loss of self. It's the space where new identity hasn't yet loaded. Most people can't tolerate that in between. They rush to fill it with activity, achievement, or another role. Yet that very stillness is where reprogramming begins. Because identity, once seen clearly, is not something to destroy, it's something to hold lightly. The moment you can observe yourself with neutrality, the loop starts to lose definition. The program can't sustain itself when you stop mistaking it for essence. Observation loosens identification, and in that loosened space, reality begins to shift its behavior. It starts responding less to the story you've built and more to the awareness behind it. That's when you start noticing strange silences in your life, moments where things seem to pause, relationships rearrange, opportunities stall. To most people, that silence feels like regression, but it isn't. It's the system preparing for a rewrite, the signal that the algorithm is changing even before the outer world knows it. The shift never begins with fireworks. It begins with silence. Long before the outer world transforms, reality slows down. Conversations fade. Familiar momentum disappears. The rhythm that used to define your days becomes uncertain. You might even feel like life has pulled its attention away from you. The people who once called suddenly don't. Opportunities seem to pause mid-air. What used to feel solid starts dissolving without explanation. And yet, that is precisely how the code begins to change. The first sign of transformation is absence. Not the absence of progress, but the absence of repetition. The pattern stops generating the same feedback loops, and because you've been unconsciously calibrated to those loops, their disappearance feels like loss. But what's really happening is recalibration. The system is suspending the old input-output chain so it can receive new instructions. At this stage, confusion is natural. The ego, built on predictability, starts asking, "What's wrong with me?" or "Why did everything slow down?" But in truth, nothing is wrong. The algorithm, for the first time, doesn't recognize your frequency. You've interrupted the automatic transmission that kept reality echoing your old identity. And since the system can't yet locate your new signal, it pauses. That pause feels like emptiness, but it's actually the neutral field where new coherence is forming. You might notice strange details during this phase. The people who once triggered you drift out of orbit. Conversations that used to ignite emotion now feel weightless. Certain desires lose their urgency. The things that once defined your sense of who I am don't provoke the same response. It's unsettling because your emotional GPS suddenly stops giving directions. But that quiet is not regression. It's proof that the loop has lost fuel. The system behaves much like nature when it transitions seasons. Before spring begins, winter enters its most still moment. The soil seems lifeless, but beneath it, root systems are rewriting their architecture. Old growth decomposes into nutrients for new forms. That's what's happening inside you. Decomposition of familiar data. The silence is not empty, it's fertile. However, this silence can be dangerous if misunderstood. Many people, sensing the stillness, rush to fill it. They interpret the pause as stagnation and attempt to make something happen. But the old algorithm thrives on that impatience. The moment you act from discomfort, you unconsciously reactivate the familiar pattern just to feel movement again. The cycle restarts, dressed in a new costume. To move through this threshold consciously, you have to resist the urge to fill the void. Allow the quiet to stretch. Observe the instinct that wants to explain, fix, or rush. That instinct is the remnant of the old self trying to reinstall itself. If you can sit through that discomfort, the sense of not knowing who you are or where you're going, you begin to feel a subtle hum beneath the stillness. That hum is coherence taking form. Physically, this stage often shows up as deep fatigue or disorientation. Your body, long attuned to high emotional volatility, is learning a slower rhythm. You might find yourself drawn to solitude or simplicity, craving less stimulation. That isn't withdrawal, it's system optimization. The algorithm is rewriting your sensory priorities, teaching you how to recognize peace not as boredom, but as data. During this reconfiguration, intuition starts to surface differently. Instead of loud impulses or bursts of certainty, it arrives as quiet knowing, so subtle that the analytical mind dismisses it. It might feel like, I don't know why, but I no longer need to chase that. That kind of neutrality is not apathy, it's alignment without tension. The more you trust it, the clearer it becomes. The challenge is that this neutrality rarely looks impressive. There's no visible victory, no grand revelation to announce. The transformation happens at a frequency below words. It's in the nervous system, not in the story, which is why almost no one recognizes it as progress. They confuse the rewiring of energy with the loss of purpose. But what's truly disappearing isn't purpose, it's programming. When the algorithm begins to change, the world mirrors back your stillness, as if testing whether you'll fall for the old triggers again. The test isn't about proving worth, it's about proving coherence. The system wants to know if your new signal is stable enough to sustain a different reality. And this brings you to one of the most paradoxical stages of the process, the moment when the code, sensing its own dissolution, shows you the old scene one last time. It feels like everything is returning to the beginning, but it isn't repetition, it's verification. What you do in that moment determines whether the new pattern anchors or fades. The key is not resistance, but recognition, understanding that this final test isn't punishment. It's the algorithm asking a single question. Have you learned to observe without feeding the loop? The moment everything begins to shift is rarely dramatic. It doesn't come with revelation or catharsis. It comes with a pause, a single breath of non-reaction. When you can witness the trigger without obeying it, the algorithm loses its anchor. The code can't sustain itself without emotional fuel. Observation, pure and uncharged, is what interrupts the sequence. This sounds simple, almost too simple for the complexity of your life, but that's what makes it powerful. The system you call reality operates through emotional repetition, not intellect. Every pattern you've ever experienced survives by re-engaging the same emotional signature: fear, shame, control, urgency, resentment. The moment that emotional signal stops being reinforced, the loop starts to unravel. You don't need to destroy the pattern, you only need to stop energizing it. Imagine standing before a mirror that has reflected the same image for years. You've tried changing the frame, adjusting the light, even cleaning the glass, but the reflection never alters. Then one day, instead of trying to fix the image, you step back and look directly at yourself. That instant of clear observation, where awareness turns inward, is the key. The reflection can't maintain the old form once the source of projection changes. Practically, this key reveals itself in small, almost imperceptible choices. A familiar tension rises in conversation, the cue that used to trigger defense or retreat. But instead of reacting, you take one slow breath. You feel the heat in your chest, the tightening in your jaw, and you simply notice it. You don't label it as anger or fear. You watch the energy as if it were weather moving through the sky. Something remarkable happens in that stillness. The charge begins to dissipate. The mind searches for its usual script, but it finds no willing actor. This is where the algorithm falters. It relies on repetition to stay coherent. The moment you introduce conscious interruption, the data begins to fragment. The body, trained to follow emotion with action, hesitates. The mind, deprived of familiar drama, goes quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to access a layer of intelligence beyond habit, awareness that observes without interference. It's tempting to think this kind of observation is passive, but it's not. Non-reaction is one of the most active states the human system can sustain. It requires immense energy to stay present without collapsing into the old reflex. The body wants closure. The ego wants story. The nervous system wants to discharge. Holding the line of awareness, neither suppressing nor indulging, is the true act of power. You might notice that when you manage to do this, reality itself seems to respond differently. The other person softens, the situation diffuses, the tension loses narrative weight. That's not magic. It's resonance. When your inner field stops broadcasting conflict, the external field adjusts to match the new coherence. Observation is not passive viewing, it's participation at a subtler frequency. Over time, these micro-moments of neutral observation accumulate. Each pause weakens the emotional infrastructure of the pattern. The neurons that once fired together begin to quiet. The body stops anticipating threat in ordinary events. You start to experience freedom not as something you create, but as something that naturally arises when reactivity dissolves. Freedom is not new construction, it's deconstruction of what was false. This practice also exposes a subtle paradox. As the pattern loses its pull, a part of you, the identity built around that pattern, may panic. It feels like losing a piece of yourself, because in a way, you are. The familiar emotion has been your internal compass for years. When it disappears, direction seems to vanish too. But that disorientation is sacred. It's the proof that the algorithm has stopped recognizing you. In that open space, intuition starts to guide in real time, without the interference of old conditioning. The next word you speak, the next choice you make carries a different frequency, one that's not derived from memory. It's not about being perfect or high vibrational. It's about being coherent. Coherence doesn't mean positive, it means whole. When your observation and emotion no longer contradict each other, you move in harmony with what is, rather than in resistance to it. The key, then, is not a tool or a mantra, it's a way of seeing. Observation without judgment rewires the entire structure of reality because it removes the emotional command that tells the algorithm to repeat. The system needs charge to survive. Neutrality starves it. But right before this neutrality stabilizes, life tends to test its integrity. You'll find yourself facing an echo of the oldest scene, the same tone, the same temptation, the same setup. It's the algorithm's final inquiry. Have you really changed? That's the threshold every transformation must cross, the moment where silence meets the familiar storm. What happens next decides whether the new pattern anchors or dissolves back into the old code. Just when you think you've broken free, life will hand you the old scene again. Same tone, same emotion, same setup, as if the universe pressed rewind. You'll look around and think, I thought I was past this. It's tempting to see this as failure, as proof that nothing really changed. But this moment is not regression, it's verification. It's the system checking whether the new code is stable. Every pattern has inertia. When you stop feeding it with emotion, the algorithm doesn't disappear immediately. It lingers like a shadow, replaying the familiar script one last time to measure your response. It's the final illusion, the test before the turn. And the test isn't about endurance or morality. It's about coherence. Can you remain aligned when faced with the echo of your old self? The irony is that this test feels indistinguishable from the real thing. You might meet a new person who speaks in the voice of an old wound, or face a challenge that mirrors the same emotional geometry you thought you'd transcended. The details are different, but the energetic fingerprint is unmistakable. The system is presenting the perfect opportunity for you to confirm the shift, not by fighting but by observing differently. If you react the old way, the loop reloads. If you stay neutral, the algorithm updates. That's the binary nature of this stage. It's not about proving strength, it's about sustaining awareness under pressure. The real exam is silent. Can you watch the program run without identifying with it? This is why transformation often feels like a cosmic prank. Just when you begin to trust the stillness, chaos knocks again. But that reappearance is not the enemy. It's the mirror showing you the difference between awareness and habit. The same situation that once pulled you into automatic reaction now stands before you, waiting to see if you'll offer the same emotional signature. There's a split second, right at the start of the encounter, when you feel the familiar charge, the body tightening, the pulse quickening, the narrative rising in your mind. That's the algorithm's invitation. You don't have to accept it. If you breathe through that first wave without attaching story to it, something remarkable happens. The emotional current loses voltage. The energy that used to spiral into drama disperses and clarity takes its place. In that clarity, you realize that nothing external has power over you. Only your participation gives it power. The test exposes this truth with mathematical precision. The external trigger is neutral. It's your reaction that creates continuity. When you decline to participate in the old pattern, the system recalibrates instantly. The field reorganizes to reflect your new frequency of observation. It's not that the algorithm rewards you for passing. It simply mirrors coherence. When you no longer feed the loop, there's nothing left for reality to echo back. The pattern dissolves because it's no longer being observed through repetition. The scene fades not by force but by obsolescence. But there's a subtle danger here. The mind can easily turn this awareness into another performance. It starts thinking, "I'll stay calm so the universe can see I've learned." That's still reaction. It's control disguised as wisdom. True neutrality carries no agenda. You don't observe to pass. You observe because observation itself is freedom. If you stay honest through this stage, you might feel a strange stillness settle over your life afterward. The triggers don't sting the same way, the emotional waves flatten, and events start to unfold with less resistance. To the ego, this may seem anticlimactic. No grand victory, no applause. But this calm is not emptiness. It's the first sign of alignment. The test before the turn is not a cosmic challenge. It's a mirror measuring your frequency. When you respond differently, the mirror changes form. Reality begins to reorganize not because you willed it, but because the observer is no longer broadcasting contradiction. And then, almost imperceptibly, something extraordinary happens. You wake up one morning and realize that the world feels lighter, not because the outer conditions have shifted dramatically, but because the inner observer has. The scenery hasn't changed much, but your relationship to it has. What used to provoke now passes through. What used to define you now simply informs you. That's the invisible threshold where creation stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like participation. You're no longer forcing outcomes, you're reading reality correctly. The reading itself rewrites the script. And that's where the algorithm, once your invisible jailer, becomes your co-creator. The quiet turning point that leads toward the next truth. When the observer changes, the entire world rearranges itself around that new perception. The real turning point is almost imperceptible. No thunder, no revelation, no cinematic glow. It arrives quietly, like a change in air pressure you only notice because something feels lighter. You still wake up in the same house, face the same responsibilities, talk to the same people. Yet everything carries a different weight. The texture of experience changes, even though the form appears untouched. This is the invisible shift, the one that rewrites reality from the inside out. The difference isn't in what happens, but in how you read what happens. You begin to sense that events aren't random collisions anymore. They're messages arranged with precision. The same circumstance that once felt like resistance now appears as guidance. The tone of life changes, not because you've mastered it, but because you've stopped arguing with it. When the observer transforms, reality no longer has to shout. It speaks softly, efficiently. Opportunities don't chase you, they align themselves in your path. Conflicts dissolve before they escalate. You no longer interpret silence as abandonment or chaos as punishment. The game, once driven by emotional reaction, shifts into orchestration, a dance between perception and unfolding. It's not that you gain control, it's that you no longer need it. Control is replaced by comprehension. you start noticing how subtle your influence has always been, not through force or demand, but through coherence. When what you feel, believe, and perceive harmonize, reality doesn't resist you, it echoes you. The invisible shift often reveals itself through contrast. You find yourself in a situation that once triggered anxiety, and there's only calm. You hear the old voice in your mind preparing to panic, and instead, there's silence. That silence isn't emptiness, it's recalibration. The system has rewritten its emotional software. You no longer vibrate at the frequency that called those experiences toward you. From the outside, no one might notice. To others, your life looks unchanged, maybe even uneventful. But internally, you've crossed a threshold that words can't fully capture. The constant mental noise has thinned, time feels slower, more fluid. The impulse to fix or prove has dissolved. You realize that life was never personal, it was always responsive. It has always been a mirror waiting for you to see clearly. This shift isn't mystical, it's mechanical. You've stopped feeding contradictions into the system. Every moment of pure observation acts like code cleanup, deleting redundant commands, releasing corrupted files. The program that used to sustain tension is now optimized for balance. The result is coherence, a steady hum of harmony that radiates through every layer of your experience. In this state, intuition becomes practical. You stop asking for signs because everything is a sign. You walk into a room and feel direction before thought intervenes. You know when to act, when to wait, when to let go. It's not supernatural, it's synchronization. You're finally operating on the same wavelength as your environment. You might notice that your relationship with effort changes too. You work, but not from strain. You create, but without the need for validation. Actions become expressions of alignment rather than strategies for control. You begin to understand that manifestation was never about pulling things toward you. It was about clearing the interference that kept you from seeing what was already connected to you. The invisible shift also redefines what self means. You stop identifying as the doer and start recognizing yourself as the space through which doing happens. The boundaries between inner and outer begin to blur. It's not that you disappear, you expand. You sense that everything you observe is an extension of consciousness itself, adjusting in real time to the frequency of your awareness. And yet, this clarity doesn't exempt you from challenge. It simply changes the relationship. Difficulty no longer feels like punishment, it feels like precision, a calibration mechanism aligning you with greater coherence. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start wondering, "What signal is this refining in me?" That question transforms every experience into instruction. The invisible shift is the point where creation and perception merge. You're not creating reality from scratch, you're decoding it correctly. Each observation becomes a line of living code, rewriting itself through you. Life stops being something you manage. It becomes something you interpret. And in that interpretation lies the quiet mastery that was always waiting, the recognition that you were never outside the system trying to influence it. You were the system observing itself, teaching itself to see. But even this awareness, this new balance between seeing and shaping, holds a deeper revelation beneath it. Once you realize that reality responds perfectly to the observer, the question turns inward again. Who exactly is doing the observing? That inquiry reveals the final truth waiting beyond every pattern, every algorithm, every shift. The understanding that the programmer and the program were never separate. You were never a victim of the algorithm. You were its author. Every focus, every feeling, every small act of attention has been a line of living code, written and rewritten through you. The loops were never punishment. They were mirrors, teaching you how creation actually works. Reality doesn't speak in words. It responds in patterns, waiting for the moment you see clearly enough to edit the script. Now that you know the code listens to your coherence, the question becomes simple. What are you observing today that you want to see more of tomorrow? If you reach this point, write in the comments, "I see the code." That will tell me you made it all the way to the end, fully aware, fully present. And if this message resonated with you, Watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. Each one deepens this same path, the art of observation, the science of reality, and the quiet mastery of the mind that creates it.